Hi, welcome. Today we are going to look at the question, what is dyslexia? Because we're talking about dyslexia advocacy, understanding it. This is a great starting point to dip in and kind of give the viewpoint that we're taking here. Now, dyslexia is a term that I kind of feel has a certain mystique around it that may not necessarily be totally deserved. A lot of IEP teams or in schools, there's this often this perceived taboo that you're not supposed to use the term dyslexia, which is anything but the truth, which we'll make another video about. But and there's various reasons for this, which we'll look at. But uh, this video, we're going to really look at a simple definition of dyslexia, basic understanding of what it actually is, and to put it really simply and oversimplify it, basically it's a difficulty with reading words off the printed page. That is basically what it is. Now, there's a lot of different reasons why that might happen, and there's a lot of different aspects to reading that a student may have difficulty with that's going to create academic problems. So, when you go to assessment and diagnostics, we're going to be looking at a lot of different things for why a student might be struggling at school. So identifying dyslexia and really pinpointing what to do about learning difficulties is a much broader subject, and dyslexia is only one aspect of all that, which over time we'll unpack a little more. But at its core, it's this problem with being able to decode words on a page, basically, is nutshell. Now, to understand that a little more, we're going to look at a construct called the simple view of reading that a lot of researchers use. This view, that this model came out in the 80s, and it's been used and corroborated in a lot of different research studies, and it has pretty strong predictive value, and it's out there a lot. So if you're been anywhere around the science of reading camp, you've heard of the simple view probably. If not, if you do a Google search, you're going to find tons of information on this. I'm not going to belabor the points here, but just to explain in the context of this video what we're looking at and understanding dyslexia, we're going to use this model. And in some of the Patreon materials, I'll link some nuances to this view and some of my favorite resources if you want to dig deeper into it. Like I said, there's a ton out there, and there's much more to the reading process than just a simple view, and there's modern critiques, and there's a lot of interesting things going on with it that I'll put out there. If you guys are interested, you can go there on the resource tab that I'm going to be creating. But for here, the simple view, if we're looking at it, is basically at the top here, we have this equation, which we can represent reading as a mix of decoding abilities. So basically phonic decoding. Can you break words into phonemes, blend them together, understand what the words, not necessarily understand, but actually figure out what the word actually is on the page. And then we have a multiplier here. This would be times, the L standing for language comprehension, or oral language comprehension or abilities, equals the C, which is the ultimate outcome, is reading comprehension. Okay, so very simple formula. And then we can take that formula, put it on a graph here to one line here is our language comprehension. So can you listen to people talking, understand what they're saying, the oral syntax, grammar, things like that. So many people can, and that's this L plus. So if you have decent oral language capabilities, you might fall in this domain. If you have more trouble understanding speech and things of that nature, you fall in this category. Now, on the other side is our decoding ability. So once again, on the left here, D minus is if you have trouble with decoding words on a page. Over here is no problem. You can map oral language to the written word without any problem, and pull the words off the page there. So On this graph, for your standard reader here, you're going to have decent decoding, decent language abilities. Uh, you can usually understand what you're reading, provided other factors are in play. Obviously, we don't all can't comprehend every text in the world, which gets into some of the nuance of that. But anyways, that's a whole nother topic. But over here is where we're going to find the dyslexia. Now, and this is what I'll say is classic dyslexic profile. So, you meet one kid with learning disability, or any learner for that matter, they're going to fall somewhere. These are all spectrums. Okay, so dyslexia itself too, it's a spectrum disorder. There's no one place, there's no diagnostic test in a one single test we can give and say, oh, that kid's got dyslexia. It's not like a blood test. So when this is another aspect we'll get into, when people want the diagnosis of dyslexia from the neuropsych, that's a whole big conversation to unpack there. So, in a nutshell, though, dyslexia is here with a student having poor decoding capabilities, but they have decent oral language comprehension. So you can sit these kids in a class and they can sit in there, they can participate fully. They're going to usually understand what the teacher is talking about. Depending on, other profiles, they'll probably have, just a decent understanding orally about everything going on in the classroom. But if you put written text in front of them and ask them to read and correspondingly often spell or write, they're going to struggle. Okay. And it's a confusing aspect because so much of schooling is in this domain. Whereas, many of these students have high IQs, they're very intelligent. There's nothing along that level that they're struggling with. It's just this ability to work with that written form. Okay, so that's all dyslexia is in a nutshell. Now the root causes of that I'll talk about in a next slide, but this is the basics. Now there are other kids who struggle in both decoding and language comprehension. Researchers have used different names for this over the years, but this is a mixed profile that is the most difficult to remediate because you have all angles that are a bit of a struggle here. And then you have this side where there are some, and probably less often, but there are some who can decode just great and rip words off the page, but their language comprehension suffers. So common populations here are often seen with like ELL, so English language learners. They might not have dyslexia, but that language comprehension through vocabulary, things you naturally pick up through the language of being in the culture, is weak. So it makes comprehension of written text pretty difficult. Or students on the autism spectrum where different cues and things like that people often pick up through oral language is weaker, which correspondingly makes it a struggle to pick it up in text as well. So these are other things that come into play, but this with dyslexia is a key one. And I'll just pause here for one moment to say, oftentimes too with dyslexia, some of these issues are going to bleed into other areas, such as math, writing, and then oftentimes we're going to find comorbid disabilities like attention and memory, and all sorts of different profiles are going to come up. That's gonna impact what we see in testing and getting into the details. So just so you know, I am oversimplifying this, but it really is on some level. If we're talking about straight definitions of dyslexia, this is one way we can understand it. Okay, not the only way, but this is a very useful framework, a very useful model for what's going on there. Now the next thing is some of the why is this happening. So there's different hypotheses out there, but the core difficulty, one of the core definitions or core understandings of dyslexia is you're often going to find some deficit with phonological capability. So the ability to literally hear and listen to language and break it apart into constituent, its components. And really, it's at the phonemic level that we're talking about reading. Which, if you don't know difference between phonological, phonemic. Don't worry for now. But basically, can you isolate sounds in the language, map them to phonic parts, and be able to decode? So almost always you're going to find some level of deficit there with dyslexic students. And there's other hypotheses that involve RAN and these other things, which we'll dig into deeper. But um, most often you're going to find some issue here in a dyslexic profile. Now, um, there's people out there that are often, you might see, they call it what, stealth dyslexia, or orthographic dyslexia. These some of these words we just use to describe these stuff, is they're not standardized. um, where the kid might be reading okay, but they can't spell well. Okay, or there's some other deficits going on that makes it confusing. And just to note, there's not any legitimate, in the research literature, there's not any identified subtypes of dyslexia currently. There are uh, people who have identified in their own work, and use different descriptors for what they're kind of seeing with the numbers. But if you hear those terms like stealth dyslexia, just know that that's not actually a commonly accepted identifier. We don't, any serious, speech language pathologist, someone steeped in the literature or the research, will not say that there's empirical subtypes of dyslexia. And you'll, so just watch out for that. Um, because we in this graph is trying to represent how there is this level of continuum of the phonological and the orthographic. So if you are struggling with the phonological, oftentimes you're going to have some issue with orthographic representations. And so sometimes we can see, like, if like on this end, if a student has a pretty serious phonological issue, and as we go along here, perhaps their phonological issues are less so, and they might tilt more towards orthographic issues, something along that lines. But the reason I'm including this is it's a continuum, and these things are two sides of the same coin, and they it's hard to fully tease out one or the other. But in the literature, in the research, in testing, with these disabilities, even if the phonological portion seems to be intact, um, there is usually some level of deficit that we're going to see in here. So that's just a nutshell here, and we'll dig into some of those details a lot more later. But at its core, at its root, that's kind of what dyslexia is. There's a problem with word decoding, and many researchers, and we'll look at the details, is there's oftentimes a strong phonological issue, sometimes speed processing, how quick we can process the letters in the spoken word and things of that nature is another confounding factor, which can lead to all these kind of orthographic issues and the rest of it. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. And like I said, there'll be more resources to dig into this for those of you who want to go deeper. And thanks for listening, and look forward to sharing more with you later.